So thank you everyone for joining today. For those who I don't know, I am Jackie from Sparrowly Group. So welcome to today's webinar on navigating the insurance landscape. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm recording this webinar from the lands belonging to the Gadigal and the Wangal peoples of the Eora Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands in which we all work on today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander custodians joining us today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and Sparrowly Group celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing culture and connection to the lands and waters of New South Wales and Australia. So through our mentoring over the last few years, we've heard time and time again from our mentees and businesses that we work with how confusing and challenging the insurance landscape can be. So we've gone to our trusted network of supporters and have found a specialist insurance broker to give you some guide rails on how to navigate insurance for your tourism business. We're not here today to say it's easy, but as a business, we advise other businesses that you should never skimp out on investing in your people, your customers and your staff, and maintaining a positive cash flow and mitigating risk. And that includes the alignment between risk and ensuring that you have the right insurance to protect you, your people, and your business. So let me introduce our guests. We have Paul Davenport and Greg Shallard from Affinity Insurance Brokers today. Paul is a highly regarded risk management specialist in the Australian equine industry with more than 45 years experience in adventure camping and equestrian activities. He continues to live that passion by his active involvement in teaching and training, setting and reviewing safety and accreditation procedures for many equine and leisure organisations in Australia. As Client Director of Affinity Insurance Brokers, he leads a team of dedicated and passionate brokers with the goal of ensuring the industry remains strong and viable for generations to come. Greg has a wide range of practical experience gained in previous years working with the equine and adventure industry. After completing a Bachelor of Science, Greg moved into the insurance industry, utilising his experience in the equine and adventure tourism industry. A qualified practicing insurance broker and senior associate, he won the 2022 Victoria Tasmanian Young Broker of the Year. We want to thank Affinity Insurance Brokers for partnering with Sparrowly Group to deliver this webinar today, and I'll shortly hand over to them. Just before I do, please feel free to use the Q&A button that you can click on at the bottom of your screen, and we'll go through the questions together at the end. Just on time and some questions around confidentiality, there may be some that we won't be able to get to, but we will follow up separately with you. But yeah, we've got some questions that have come through already, which is really great. Please also use the chat button if you are having any tech issues or have anything that you need to get through. So I'll now hand over to Paul and Greg. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Jackie, for the great introduction, and we do appreciate Sparrowly getting us involved in this. It's been a pleasure to work with you up until this point. So let's see if we can make it through to the end as we go. Look, thank you for joining us here today. And, you know, this is an interesting topic that you've chosen to get us to speak on, and navigating the insurance landscape. And I think, as Jackie introduced, this is insurance being a confusing and challenging environment. I'm going to add to that most people find it pretty boring and feel that it's a bit of a grudge, purchase that they've got to do. And I don't disagree with you. So just let's get that out there. But as Jackie also pointed out, it is critical to us being able to achieve what we do. Real bit of very quick background on Affinity Insurance Brokers and Greg's and my involvement is that, yes, we have come from an outdoors recreation and camping background. Jackie mentioned my number of years of experience. I must have started when I was very young, obviously. But what I can say is that when I was running a camp many years ago, Greg actually was one of the kids that attended that camp and got to experience the outdoors in a way that many kids don't get to do these days. So we do come from that industry, and 20 years ago I got drawn into insurance because of these very questions that you've posed today. And So I got brought in as being a link between the underwriter and reality. And both Greg and I are really passionate about the activities and the adventures and the provision that you guys provide for, future Australians and existing Australians. And it's really important to us to see that it succeeds. So just important that you realise that the reason we are here and working in insurance is so that we can make sure that, this landscape that you're all working in is sustainable, and insurance is a critical part of that. So that's a bit of where we're coming from, and hopefully that makes a bit of sense.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you for everyone for having us here today. This is a little bit of my life, as you can see in this first slide. I also work as a ski patroller up in the snowfields through the winter, so still actively involved in the tourism industry. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I know it brings a lot of joy to my life and a lot of joy to others, but out there are a lot of diverse risks that need to be identified and worked through, and we see that on the ski fields. We also see that practically for a lot of businesses, whether it's financial risk, people risk. We're seeing cyber risk becoming quite a large piece of debate at the moment, with things like Medibank and other data breaches that have been occurring. Insurance is quite a thing that needs to be explored. There are a lot of different products out there. There are a lot of different exposures out there. And even for us, it's not something one broker can necessarily even handle on themselves. That's why within our business, we've got brokers that specialise in public liability, professional indemnity, property, along with things like cyber and workers' compensation. If we find it hard, I know businesses will find it even harder without having the years of working in this space. And what we've really found is it is so important to have a trusted advisor in your business, just like your lawyer, your accountant, Sparrowly Group. Your business coaches are a really important part. We believe that a broker should be a really important part as well to help you navigate the landscape, whether it's people being injured in the business, dealing with the weather events that we're seeing now. A lot of businesses have vehicles on the road, employment issues, defamation, the advice that we're giving in businesses, the property that we have, injury to our staff. There are so many different things that have to be navigated, and we can't do it alone. So this is what we see as a really important landscape to seeing a business being successful, and it's not something that we believe that you can do alone. But Paul, what are we seeing so far?
Yeah, so Greg, what I was going to say is that what we see on a regular basis as we switch on to the next slide is that most people have what we call an insurance-led approach, where they're discussing the impacts of their business that insurance has and how they've got to adapt to insurance to get it. And the question's generally how much it is. So price is is a major driver for most people. Although availability is becoming more and more an issue that people are identifying, that it doesn't matter how much it is, it's whether we can get it or not. And then, of course, it's making sure that we get the coverage, because we do see that that's a major issue. People are buying a product that often doesn't even cover what they do, which is a critical issue. And this whole concept of this insurance-led approach is I think what's helping contribute to the confusion for people as to what it's about. If we have a look at what, from Affinity's point of view, what we should be seeing, we kind of look a little more old-fashionedly at what's the new common sense term. I think they call it now risk management. Is that how it goes? Is what we're seeing is what we'd like to be seeing is more of a holistic risk management approach, where people are actually looking for the actual identification of risk. Going back to the old things, when you're running a tourism operation, the last thing we want to do is have someone get hurt. And the whole intention of insurance was in the event that we make a mistake and something goes wrong, then there is a way of providing compensation for that person, because we have a responsibility to do so. But what's taken place over the last decade and a half in particular, and probably even longer than that in the cycle before, is that we've seen insurance being a port of first call. Businesses take shortcuts, get things done. It's okay, we're insured, we get them some money and off they go. And the public has then in turn turned around and looked at, tourism businesses almost as a revenue opportunity, where if they get hurt, bang, they get it because they know that they can get some money back out of it. So we've got to try to rejig the narrative back to where it was. So this holistic risk management approach is where we as a business start looking at, the context and the assessment and the evaluation of our risks. What can we do, once we work out what our appetite for risk is? And businesses, risk is not a bad thing. Risk can be a good thing when it's prioritised properly, and we'll talk more about that later. The business should then look at what their risk appetite is, and then making sure that we can run a viable business. But the insurers, remember, they're running a business as well, so their viability needs to be considered also. When we're looking at the risk reduction side of things, what staff training do we do? What's the induction process for our staff? What are our procedures? Have we got those? So in the event of something going wrong, okay, then we can rely on these things saying, okay, we thought of this, we thought of this, we thought of this, and this still went wrong. And then that's where we finally look at insurance saying, okay, how can we transfer the risks? Sometimes we've got to look at what agreements are in place, the old waiver, contracts, but insurance is also a form of that mitigation, that risk reduction process, as reducing the risk onto your own business's exposure. And then we can make informed decisions about what we're going to allow happen, what controls we'll put in place, and what experience we want people to understand. So that's kind of where we want to come from in our discussion today.
And Paul, insurance is only one way of transferring risk, isn't it? We see within businesses there are things that we don't want to do ourselves, so we contract those things away. We might have certain agreements that we transfer risk away in as well. So it is quite an interesting landscape to navigate, and it's not something that can be looked at on its own. You actually have to look at it within the greater picture of things so that you can make informed business decisions. Now, we hear about the insurance issues that businesses are struggling with. Do we have an insurance issue, or do we have an overall risk management issue? And it's a very interesting philosophical point to get to, because like you mentioned there, Paul, is that insurers are businesses too, and insurance fundamentally is quite a simple game. It is money in versus money out, and that's how all business works. If the money out is more than the money in, that business is not going to be able to have adequate cash flow, it's not going to stay solvent, and they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And this is where insurers have been struggling as well. We've probably have seen the wildfires over in California. We've seen flooding up in North Queensland this week. There is unprecedented times that we're going through with the climate drivers that are really starting to have these large macro influences. And when we start looking into these areas, we've drilled down to probably the two main issues that we're seeing for businesses at the moment. On the left, we've got the property insurances. On the right, we've got the public liability, and that includes agritourism, adventure tourism. It also just includes some more things like hospitality and accommodation style business as well. So when we drill down, and often the micro things are the things that a business can control. So where are the buildings? How close are they to bushland? How are they being maintained, and how old are they? What are the buildings constructed out of, and what is done there? These are some of the things that insurers look at when they are assessing risk. So old buildings that haven't had their wiring redone are often a concern for businesses. But then some of the macro things that we're seeing are things like government regulation that really do drive costs. We've got the climate changes that we've got in terms of rainfall and extreme weather events and the natural catastrophes that we're seeing. Insurance is not just a economic construct which exists on its own. It actually sits as part of a global economic system. So things like trade affect reinsurance, availability of capital, interest rates, the exchange rates. All of these things have quite a big impact. And also just the geographic spread of Australia is something that is very unique compared to the rest of the world. So these are some of the things that we can control and can't control ourselves directly on the property side. And on the public liability side, there probably are a few more things that businesses can really influence. Some of the issues that insurers keep coming back and also have been identified by industry have been things like we have great new activities come through, but there isn't a governing body or standards which oversee them. Where there are standards, we do see time and time again, unfortunately, in the news where businesses have not followed those standards that are in place. And those might be about how the equipment's used, how the activities run, how the activities are staffed, the ratios. We see a lot of really good quality operators, but the documentation may be lacking. So when the legal system gets involved, when work cover gets involved, there isn't the written documentation to actually back up the business and really advocate them to say that they were doing those things. Workforce is a massive issue, and I know a lot of people will be nodding their heads right now around how hard it is to get skilled and qualified staff. A lot of things in tourism areas, housing is a big issue. How we remunerate adequately to keep the qualified staff around. That also can lead to a risk, especially where activities are involved, because there are a lot of hard skills that are needed to run adventure activities and things like that safely. The economic viability is a really interesting one. The end consumer often doesn't want to pay what the cost really should be to provide the service that a tourism business does. And especially during cost of living, this has become a massive issue. So businesses are often looking how they can save costs or skinny things up to ensure that they can turn a profit or stay viable. And the documented risk management I've gone through there. Some of the macro trends that we see on the activity side is the lack of industry regulation. In a lot of other areas, there is a lot of regulation, whether it's the marine or shipping areas, the medical industries. There's a lot of regulation there. Tourism doesn't have those same levels, and that is picked up on by the insurers. And might it have a direct approach on impact on your individual business? It does shift things at the top end. When insurers are seeing different risks, they are seeing inconsistency in the controls in place. Some people use helmets, some people don't. Some people use life jackets, some people don't. And the legal system is probably one of the biggest issues that we are seeing at this time. Now, I've spoken about all of the things that are a struggle, but there are things that are happening where we're moving in the right direction. And Paul, you've been around this space a little bit longer than me. What are some of the successes that you are seeing in how industry and individuals are working through some of these challenges?
Yeah, Greg, I mean, awareness is one of the biggest things. And so sessions like this where people are actually going to be able to ask the questions, we're going to throw up a whole lot of material. The questions will be where the rubber hits the road, because then people want to be specific about what they do and say. But when I look at what's worked over the past 20 years that I've been involved, with insurance being the focus, what's worked is where industry has actually led the solutions, rather than asking the insurer, oh, what is right, what is wrong, what should I do, what shouldn't I do. It's trying to actually come together as a group, as a collective, and not trying to protect their own patch, but to genuinely say, right, how can we do things better? How do we make this work? What do our staff need to do? What are the ratios that we should have in doing this? What should be the minimum standards what there? And if industry drives it, And it needs to be collaborative. One of the biggest issues that I've seen is that oftentimes people have tried to manipulate things in the past. And the question that non-trained people will say is, for example, well, you're sending one staff member out with 10 people. What happens if that staff member gets hurt? Every other business has to consider that notion, but somehow, for a while there, our businesses and our industry seem to think that we were immune to that because, I've got stories of people who broke their collarbone but crawled their way all the way back and got their group back to safety. Well, that's great. Makes for exciting reading back in the 80s, but it's not how people think now. So being industry-led and being frank about what the risks are, we can identify risks much better than the insurers can. The insurers will typically Google an activity. They'll use that, famous AI type approach to it. And of course, what will throw up are all of the bad things that happen in that thing. So we need to focus on what the positive pieces are. And by leading it in a positive framework, by having, industry bodies supportive of what is happening on the ground, that's where we're seeing the solutions being driven, because we're educating the public as well as the legal profession, as well as the insurers, as well as our own people, and we're doing it from the ground up. I hope I've kind of summarised that in a way that we can do justice in such a short period of time.
And these, Paula, these are the really like the holistic, the macro sort of things that we can be doing. And it's not something that we can necessarily solve just by ourselves, but we can definitely impact things on our own, within our own business and seeing some of these successes. So really considering what property you purchase, if you haven't purchased your property yet, actually looking at the fire overlays, the risk factors before you purchase the property. Then if you've already got the property, where are you putting the buildings on that property? So what are the exposures? What are the aspects? How is that going to be defended against fire? Is it far enough away from the trees? So if there is a storm event, the trees don't fall onto it. Are those buildings being maintained adequately? Do they need improvements? Is it time to actually knock down some of those buildings and improve them? Fire breaks, staff training. Do the staff actually know how to use the fire equipment? Has it been tested? Do we need to actually have a slight shift in what we're doing at the property to actually make it more palatable to the insurer? So putting our best foot forward to get the best response.
And Greg, that's a really critical one, because what often happens is the insurer starts to ask a whole lot of questions because we take for granted what we do or how we go about it. Or on the flip side, we've been doing this for 30 years, we've never had an issue, we're okay. So it is really trying to be proactive and educate the insurer as to everything. And sometimes you only get one chance. So you might put forward your information to the insurer, and because it's missing a whole lot of the proactive pieces, the insurer's already going, no, I don't want this. And to undo or change their mind is very, very difficult. So making sure that you present the right picture first time is really, really critical.
Yeah, and this is a common thing that we see, is where multiple businesses have approached multiple brokers and the insurer's seen multiple different submissions, and that does make it really hard for the insurer to know where the truth is. Now, we're talking about multiple brokers, Paul. Do you think that's the best way to go, or do you think you should have one broker to actually represent you once you pick them?
It's really interesting because this question comes up a lot, and a lot of businesses, for example, tender, out the things. And what they're doing is, brokers' job is to go and find the best value for the client. In Australia, you have to have a licensed broker to provide you with insurance. You don't get direct access to insurer other than your home and contents and your personal insurances. So in order to get the majority of insurances, you need a broker to actually provide the advice, if you like, to get those things. And oftentimes people are asking several brokers the same questions, and those several brokers are going back to insurers with different their interpretation of what's going on. So insurers are getting mixed messages about the same facility. And in the tourism space, there are so few insurers that genuinely engage that they're seeing the same risk time and time again. And as I said, unless they're getting it in a positive light, then their first response is going to be no. because that's the easiest way to not risk their jobs, not risk the investment that they've got. So making sure that you have a specialist broker is really important. So what our suggestion is to make sure that you do get a specialist insurance. Now, we've got quite a team out at Affinity, and we have varying skill sets that sit within there. We have specialists in the property market, with specialists in the liability market, in the tourism and leisure space, in the equine and leisure space. So we focus on those, what we call those verticals, and we provide that expertise inside that corner. So if you're looking to find a broker, you need to make sure, that the broker is, someone that already has business in this space. Find someone who's got experience and knows what they're talking about and knows they're going to approach the right insurer the right way, because it's critical that that broker understands which insurers have the appetite, for this type of business, because you will very quickly annoy. A lot of insurers are pulled out of the markets just simply because they didn't, they didn't have an appetite for it. So they're saying no even before they found out. So specialist brokers will have that relationship with the insurers. They will know where to place it. They'll have their panel of insurers they'll work through, and it's their job to get the best deal for you, not your job to try to play off brokers against each other, because invariably that's what will happen. Does the broker have a really good understanding of your business, the activities that you undertake, the industry in which you work in? All right, it's really important. Check out what their reputation is in that space. Have other people heard of them? What claims support do they provide? This is a critical one, because at the end of the day, that's basically what you're paying for. For a lot of people that we talk to, the only interaction they have with their broker is when they get an invoice. And, whereas for the majority of our clients, for example, we are part of their team. The broker should be part of your team. They should be part of what the conversations are. Like Greg said earlier, don't buy the property and then say, okay, can we use this for this? Talk to your broker and say, these are the properties I'm looking for. These are the activity I'm going to undertake. And they should have the knowledge to be able to say to you, right, these are the risks associated with that. These are the costs that'll be associated with that and where it'll go. So you want your broker, to be more than just someone who sends you an invoice for that mandatory thing that you've got to have, that grudge buy that we talked about originally. Let them be part of your team as a holistic risk advisor. A good broker shouldn't be making the decisions for you. They should be guiding you so that you can make an informed decision. And that's the critical part here. And that way then, when a claim comes, right, they are equipped and empowered to understand where this goes. If you've made a mistake, something goes wrong, then what we'll be doing is we're going to be advising you, let's get this settled as quickly as possible, because one, that's going to become a much quicker and cheaper and cleaner outcome. And in the end, any delays, it's the lawyers that will make the difference. I know this is recorded, I've got to be careful and all that stuff, but once that gets involved, they are the ones that make the money. The outcome for the client is often reduced in a sense, and the outcome for you is often as the tourism provider and the activity provider is often expanded because of those instances. So you need someone who can actually make decisions right there, right then, and get it sorted out fine. So being a part of the team is what I would really encourage you to find out with brokers. And they can only do that if they know the industry and if they get to know your business.
So Paul, and Hamish has just jumped in with a couple of questions there. Like, how do we establish these questions? How do we know their reputation? And it's coming along to events like this, being involved with your industry peak bodies. We're working with organisations like Sparrowly Group. Word of mouth is actually one of the most important things that we see as well. Actually having conversations with other businesses similar to yours that are in your Chamber of Commerce. We know a lot of regional centres, that's a really important thing. Trusting your gut is a really important one as well. Could you sit down and have a beer with them and have a chat? Are they actively listening? Just those basic human connections are actually a really important thing. if they're able to communicate back to you what you've just said to them, because often a broker is acting as the in-between between you and the insurer. What happens is if the broker doesn't necessarily understand it, they can't even communicate it back to you. How would they communicate it back to the insurer? How do they dress? If you're running an agritourism business and the broker turns up in a suit and a tie, I'm guessing 99% of the time they're not going to be the broker for you. And these are just common things that you can see. I know we see brokers, especially in the farm and rural space, they're rocking up in their work boots and jeans and a shirt, and it's probably got stains on it from where they were feeding their cattle that morning. So they're managing their own farm and also working as an insurance broker. Finding out what their personal interests, how long have they been in this role? So these are certain things that I look for, and these are things that we look for when we're hiring staff as well. Like, how do they fit in with the industry? What credibility do they have? A lot of our staff and a lot of our brokers actually come from industry. So I've got skiers, I've got horse riding coaches, I've got competitors, I've got people that have worked at horse studs. So we've actually employed them and taught them insurance rather than trying to teach tourism to insurance people. It's a very subtle shift, but we do find it does make a really big difference. And for them to be able to work through these things, they actually have to understand the industry. And Hamish, that I know that there's some questions that have come through so far, and this is some that had come through before the meeting. That we see multiple quotes coming through. There's a big price range. They all appear to cover the same thing. And then how does the broker explain those things? You can often, before you even get to the quoting stage, ask them about beekeeping. Can they explain it? Can they talk about the different type of hives, the seasonality of it, the mites that we've got now in Australia that could affect things? So do they actually understand what you are doing? Because those things are very important. One of the things that I also see within the tourism industry quite commonly is the cheap quote often is a bit of a false indicator. One of the big things that I often see is the cheap quote might say it covers the business, but it might have a heap of exclusions in it. So often we see in especially agritourism or adventure tourism businesses, there are a participation exclusion. So it covers if a herd of cattle get out on the road and hit a car, but it doesn't actually cover the people coming onto your property and participating in the farm tour or getting bitten by a bee whilst they're actually during the tour. So who the actual insurer is can actually really influence price as well. In Australia, there are authorised insurers and there are unauthorised foreign insurers. Often the unauthorised foreign insurers, their pricing is cheaper. However, there aren't the same financial guarantees that are in place by authorised insurers. These are things that can have a large impact on the price. And this is why having a broker that actually understands your business and can work through specific scenarios are very, very important. Through all of this, we're not trying to sell your product or push you down a certain path. What we're trying to show you is that the broker is such a critical part of your business, and having the wrong broker or the wrong advisor and listening and trusting that advice can have a massive negative impact on your business when times get tough. So doing that work beforehand is a really, really critical part. So searching out again to your industry bodies through word of mouth. If you're still struggling there, you can reach out to the National Insurance Brokers Association, and they will be able to help you, point you in the right direction. Now, I've seen a few questions come through in the chat, Jackie. Do we want to hear some of those and maybe see if we can shed some light on a few of those questions?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's been great. Thanks, Greg and Paul. So some questions have come through, and I know we've got someone that's raised their hand, so we will unmute you in a moment. We'll just go through these questions first. So one is, what are the most common insurance gaps that tourism businesses often overlook?
Probably the insurance gaps is actually doing the initial needs analysis first. So actually going through the process of actually understanding what their risks are. So often we see businesses go to solution mode and go, oh, we need to purchase all these different things without going, oh, we don't actually own any vehicles, so why do we need a motor policy? Actually working out how those things are. Another common crossover is often tourism businesses are small businesses. The crossover between your personal assets and your business assets, there's often some gray areas there. You use your personal ute for the business, and then you carry some passengers in it, that actually could be required under a commercial motor policy. So this is where actually getting a holistic understanding is really important. And probably one of the biggest ones we're seeing now is cyber, especially when people are going on tours, multi-day things, they're traveling by themselves. You're going to be collecting medical information for them. If you get hacked, you could be releasing information about their identity, their previous medical conditions, and that has some pretty big impacts there. So though cyber is a really poignant topic at the moment.
Great, thank you. Paul, did you want to add anything, or I'll go to the next question?
No, move on to the next question. We'll keep them rolling and see how we go.
Perfect. Okay, so another one's come through. How can small businesses manage insurance costs while still ensuring adequate coverage and managing accepted risks?
So this goes a little bit to what we talked about in the beginning there, where we're talking about getting your broker engaged early. Cost is something, I think in the tourism industry, it's very interesting. How do people set their pricing? So I'm just going to flip the question for a little bit, Jackie, to have people consider, okay, when we do our pricing, when I talk to people, they price it because this is what people can afford. We're just underneath our competitor, or we're a premier experience, so we provide it 20% more than our competitor. But very few businesses actually analyse their costs and see what it actually costs them to undertake. When we source our power provider, our phone provider, we consider price versus. And look, that's always a good one. Just as an example, when we're talking about, if we're looking at oh, look, I can get my Optus phone for this much less, and then you take the Optus phone home and you don't have coverage in the area. Well, are you actually getting it for less where the coverage is over here? So our insurance needs to be considered the same. Now, because they're small business, we are very cost sensitive on things. So we need to have those discussions early to say, okay, what is the cover? Because there's no good in, if you think it's worth $500 and it's going to be $5,000, you need to budget and price that accordingly. So knowing what you're in for actually then sets expectation. What insurers have done in the past is that they have provided a really low false floor because they've bought into businesses and into industries that they didn't know anything about. What happens then is the claims come hitting, and then the insurer withdraws from the market. But then another insurer enters and claims hit and they withdraw from the market. And then after 2 or 3 years, you've got nobody else who wants to play in the space because they've all come in too cheap. And this is that whole idea of not understanding the industry that they're insuring. So it's a short-term solution that actually provides a really large long-term issue. And tourism has long been doing that because people have often been getting coverage for way too little. So their expectation then is a price difference. I use the demonstration of, and apologies for using the horse analogy, but for buying hay. And the analogy I use for that is that if I offer everybody on this call a bale of hay for 50 cents, everybody's going to say, yep, I'll have that. And then every one of them are going to complain when they find that they get the bale of hay and it's mouldy and are no good. Because anybody who has made a bale of hay before, and this is the old-fashioned hand bale, sorry for those young people that don't know what a hand bale is, but it costs more than 50 cents to grow and produce the bale. So, why would I be able to buy a good one for less than what it costs to produce? And so we've got to understand what the actual cost is before we start to encounter, how we reduce our costs.
And Paul, to extend on that, you use two words, adequate cost and adequate coverage, Jackie. Adequate depends on the different business. Different businesses have different risk appetites. So what one business says 10,000 is perfectly fine, another business says that's crazy. So actually understanding what lens is coming through and what is adequate coverage depending on the risk appetite is really, really important. If you live in Melbourne, cyclone coverage, you don't really need it. But if you're in Cairns, you do. So understanding what that risk exposure is for your location actually determines what those things are. And then once you work out what that context is, doing everything in your power to put the best foot forward. So the maintenance, the documented risk management, all of those things actually drive adequate price. Because if the risk's better, the price and coverage is better. And it's actually all comes down to risk.
And Greg, that's combined with from actual things that the broker can in turn do, and they know the product, is that you can then buy into that and take a bit more skin in the game. So oftentimes you can look at increasing the excess, which will lower the premium, but they'll get to a point where increasing the excess is not going to lower the premium because the catastrophic loss is still what the insurer has to protect against. The other thing is making sure that you've got an insurer with an adequate premium pool size, because if you've got an insurer here and here that are all spreading the risk, none of them are actually getting a premium pool that will be sustainable. So this is where knowing who's in the industry for the long term makes a big difference.
And also, Paul, sticking with the same insurer for multiple years. So rather than shopping around each year, often we see clients that stick with the one insurer for multiple years and have actually, say if they're paying $10,000 a year for 5 years, they've got $50,000 with the insurer. They have a $20,000 or $30,000 claim, the insurer has still made money on them. So what happens is when they get their 6th year renewal, the price doesn't go through the roof. If they've only been with that insurer for 1 year because they've moved every year, the insurer's now paid $30,000 out on a $10,000 premium. The premium's probably going to $40,000 the next year. So there are certain scenarios that the decisions that have been made in previous years also affect the current year's coverage and costs. So this is again where having the trusted advisor to navigate the pros and cons of the decision making is key. And you say, how do we manage those costs? Have a trusted broker.
Great, thank you. Just one final question around how can businesses ensure they are covered for extreme weather events and natural disasters? I mean, you just mentioned, Greg, around like location-based disasters as well.
Yeah, and this is that holistic view again. Being covered for an extreme event doesn't necessarily mean insured for a risk event. That's part of that overall risk transference process that we looked at earlier. So one of the first things you can do to be covered by extreme risk events is going, what controls can we do? So I know a lot of my caravan parks in North Queensland, they go around and remove all the awnings before a weather event comes through because they know that's a weak thing. They know they can't get insurance for that. They know that it's not cost effective to get a policy from the ground up. So they run a higher excess level to get rid of those attritional claims, but they're still covered for the big events. Having some big give and take when you live in a high risk environment is a really important thing. Sometimes it can be having an indemnity cover versus a replacement cover. Sometimes it's actually having a self-insurance portion as well. So looking at those holistic strategies, unfortunately in Australia, we've got such a big geographic spread and we are impacted by so many different things. And tourism businesses, I think the reason why we see it the most in this space is, where do we want to go? We want to go where it's warm. Well, that's where the cyclones are. We want to go where it's cool on the rivers. That's where the floods are. There are so many things that are the benefits of our businesses that actually lead to increased risks. And it's always a very careful balancing game to work through there. And so we have to take ownership of what we can, transfer what we can, and then accept a certain level of risk as well. Because if you're in a big city, that's fine, you'll be able to get a full insurance policy. But the reality is, in the current environment, there is going to be some give and take.
And one of the issues that I'll just extend that just slightly is that you've got to think of how you portray your business publicly. What you put on social media, what you have on your website, that is always going to be a window for the insurer to look at how you run your business. We see pictures that go on a website that do not represent what people do. They provide a romanticism of what people do. And that actually just undoes everything when it comes to credibility to the insurer, because we put forward this thing and then the insurer looks at the website and says, but they just posted this or they just did that. So we need to really be careful as to how we portray. One of the biggest issues that we're dealing with in this tourism space is the preeminence of information that's going out saying we are under pressure and can't get insurance. We are here and we can't do this, or insurance premiums have gone through the roof. So insurers look at that and say, well, then we don't want to play in that space if it's causing that issue. Remember, insurers are investors in your business. They're also looking for viability. So if they can make more money by going to a benign risk than they can in protecting you, where will they go? So we need to be careful that we do promote ourselves as a professional industry whilst still being passionate about what we're delivering.
Yeah, great, thank you. I'm just going to allow Hamish to come off mute, and I'm just going to pause the recording. I know Hamish wanted to ask a question.
Thanks, guys.
Well,
great. So yeah,
thanks very much for having us. Greg's just going to share this last slide, which will have our contact details on there. But again, similar to the discussions we've been having with the specific examples, this is what your insurance broker should be able to do, is engage with you, be able to chat with you. You're the expert in your field, but they do need to understand what you're doing to be able to provide you with the expertise in their field that can support your business. And working collaboratively and working together, you should be able to get the answers that you need. They might not be the answers that you want. Oftentimes I'm asked questions but the last guy said this. Well, that's what you wanted to hear. You need someone on your team that's going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
Cool. Great. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Greg. Really appreciate that. And thanks, everyone, for joining today. We will send out the recording and the slides shortly. So thank you again. And also feel free to reach out to us at Sparrowly Group on mentoring@sparrowly.com. If you have any questions, we're here to support you on your business journey as well. But thanks again to Paul and Greg, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having us along, Jackie. Keep up the good work.